April 8th, 1944. A cold wind swept across the open fields near Dover, England. Rows of massive tanks glistened under the pale morning sun, or at least they appeared to. Their olive-green paint caught the light convincingly, their turrets menacingly pointed toward the English Channel. But a closer look revealed the truth. These Shermans were nothing more than air-filled rubber shells, creaking slightly in the breeze. Private James Jimmy Cole of the U.S. 23rd Headquarters Special Troops crouched beside one of them, gripping a small air pump like a field mechanic from some absurd circus. "You'd think Jerry'd never believe this," he muttered, sweat streaking his forehead despite the chill. His comrade, Sergeant Bill Blass, a fashion designer before the war, laughed as he adjusted a fake radio antenna on a nearby truck. "That's the point, Jimmy. They're supposed to..." Operation Fortitude South, the greatest deception in modern military history, was underway. A few miles away, at a commandeered farmhouse turned command post, Colonel Harry Reeder pored over a wall-sized map. Red pins marked the supposed assembly points of the 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG, a completely fictitious invasion force under the command of one of the most famous generals alive, George S. Patton. Patton, the Germans believed, was too bold, too aggressive, too dangerous to be idle. He had to be leading the main Allied assault. That assumption would be the bait. Outside, teams of artists, radio operators, and engineers worked in perfect synchronization. Trucks moved back and forth to simulate supply activity. Radio operators transmitted streams of meaningless chatter, orders, convoy reports, made-up casualty lists, all designed to be intercepted by German intelligence. Pilots and reconnaissance planes photographed the fake installations, knowing those images would soon reach Berlin at night. Soldiers rigged canvas tents with lights to imitate a bustling army camp. From above, it looked like a fortress preparing for war. From the ground, it was a ghost theater, hundreds of miles of illusion designed to fool one of the most formidable intelligence networks on Earth. Across the Channel, in occupied France, German agents began sending coded messages back to their handlers. "Enemy buildup continues at Dover," one report read. "Patton's forces are preparing for a channel crossing at Pas-de-Calais." Hitler's generals nodded grimly. Everything fit their expectations. The real Allied invasion, they concluded, would strike at the narrowest point between Britain and France, not at Normandy, far to the west. By late spring, the deception was so elaborate that even Allied reconnaissance units occasionally mistook the dummies for actual tanks. "It's like fighting shadows," one RAF officer quipped. "Except the shadows are fighting back, with air pumps and static." And yet, the illusion held. German high command shifted divisions, artillery, and coastal defenses to protect Calais, draining their strength from Normandy, precisely as the Allies intended. In a war defined by brute force, this would be a victory of imagination. The fate of D-Day, and perhaps Europe itself, depended not just on soldiers, but on artists, radio men, and inflatable tanks. As the sun dipped below the Channel horizon, the men of the Ghost Army gathered around their campfires. Somewhere beyond the waves, the real invasion force was training in silence. Jimmy Cole looked up from his mug of tea, watching the faint lights of landing craft far out to sea. "Do you think he'll ever find out?" he asked. Sergeant Blass grinned. "Oh, they'll find out," he said. "Just not in time." May 20th, 1944. A convoy of trucks rolled through the mist-covered countryside near Dover. To any observer, it looked like a mechanized column preparing for the biggest amphibious assault in history. But the truth was almost comical. Inside the trucks were not troops or ammunition, but sound engineers, sculptors, and radio technicians. Their mission wasn't a fight, but to perform. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, known to insiders as the Ghost Army, was unlike any other unit in the U.S. military. Composed of artists from New York, sound designers from Hollywood, and signal experts from the Army's Communications Corps, their task was to conjure an entire invasion force out of thin air. Captain Fred Fox, a playwright before the war, stood on a hillside directing a crew of men laying out a row of Sherman dummies. Spacing 20 meters apart, he shouted, Make it look like a proper armor division, not a parking lot. Below, the men wrestled with canvas and rubber in the wind, their laughter echoing across the field. From the distance of a Luftwaffe reconnaissance plane, those rubber shapes became terrifying, a phantom legion poised to strike across the channel. Meanwhile, in a nearby tent, Lieutenant Bill Sales of the Signal Company was hunched over a radio set, generating hours of scripted communications. He'd studied authentic transmissions from real divisions, the tempo, the tone, the rhythm of Army bureaucracy. Now, he mimicked them perfectly. Alpha to Dog Company, request vehicle repair at grid 4 to 7. He barked into the microphone, then switched frequencies. Report all units of 10th Armored regrouping east of Dover. Over. The messages were carefully timed, layered with deliberate errors, and sent across frequencies the Germans were known to monitor. Nothing was random. Every whisper of static was another thread in the web of deception. And then there was the centerpiece of the ruse, General George S. Patton himself. The Germans feared Patton more than any other Allied commander. His aggressive tactics in North Africa and Sicily had earned him a reputation for unpredictability and ruthlessness. To German intelligence, it made perfect sense that he would lead the main Allied invasion. So, when the Allies placed Patton in command of the fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, the deception gained a face and a legend. Fake press leaks hinted at his presence in southeast England. Locals saw him inspecting the Phantom camps. Even Allied soldiers were forbidden from questioning his movements. On several occasions, Patton gave rousing speeches to formations that didn't even exist, rows of dummies and a handful of carefully selected men standing in for battalions. Every move he made was watched by German spies in Britain, all of whom were, unbeknownst to Berlin, double agents working for British intelligence under Operation Double Cross. Their reports flowed steadily to the Abwehr, confirming the buildup at Dover and the supposed target, Pas-de-Calais. Meanwhile, real Allied divisions were secretly moving west toward the hidden embarkation ports for Operation Neptune, the actual invasion of Normandy. As June approached, the deception reached its crescendo. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights captured images of tank formations, landing craft, and vast fuel depots along the southern coast. Radio intercepts buzzed with orders from General Patton's headquarters. In Berlin, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt reviewed the intelligence and declared, "It is obvious. The main assault will come at Calais. Normandy is a feint." Hitler agreed. "Hold your reserves," he ordered. "Let the Americans waste their strength on diversions." The Ghost Army had achieved the impossible. They had convinced the Third Reich's finest minds that shadows were real. But for the men inflating tanks and transmitting phantom orders, the illusion came with a burden. They knew that when the real invasion began, thousands of soldiers would storm the beaches without the full weight of German defenses, because of their lie. And they prayed that their illusion would hold long enough for those men to survive. June 6, 1944, 5:30 hours. Normandy, France. The sky above the channel burned with tracer fire and smoke. Allied landing craft pushed through the surf toward the beaches, packed with soldiers whispering final prayers. The roar of naval guns thundered in the distance, shaking the water like an earthquake. Operation Overlord, the greatest amphibious invasion in human history, had begun. But in the German high command's war rooms hundreds of miles away, confusion reigned. Reports flooded in. Massive landings at Normandy, paratroopers behind enemy lines, beachheads forming. Yet, for all their urgency, Hitler and his generals refused to believe it was the main assault. In their minds, the real invasion, led by General Patton's mighty 1st U.S. Army Group, had yet to begin. Normandy, they decided, was merely a diversion. At the OKW headquarters in Berchtesgaden, a weary intelligence officer named Major Reinhard Kuhn pored over aerial photos of England. "Mein Führer," he said cautiously, "the buildup near Dover continues. Reconnaissance confirms armor concentrations and landing craft still in place. This must be Fortitude." Hitler nodded, eyes cold. "Exactly. Normandy is a trick. The decisive blow will fall at Calais. And so, as thousands of Allied troops fought and died on the beaches, Germany's elite armored divisions, the 15th Army, over 150,000 men, sat waiting near Calais, doing nothing. The deception was working perfectly. Meanwhile, back in England, the men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops watched the invasion unfold through radio updates. They were under strict orders to keep the illusion alive, to make sure the Germans remained fixated on Calais. For the next several weeks, they doubled their efforts. At night, searchlights flickered across the horizon, mimicking the movement of supply convoys. Dummy landing craft made of wood and canvas were towed into the channel, creating the illusion of massive naval preparations. New radio transmissions reported troop movements, reinforcements, and supply shortages, all centered around the imaginary Fusag divisions. Even General Patton played his part flawlessly. On June 10th, he made a highly publicized inspection of his troops in southeast England, knowing that German spies would report it instantly. To Berlin, it seemed unthinkable that Patton would be anywhere but near the main front. And if he hadn't moved to Normandy, then surely the main attack hadn't either. For weeks after D-Day, Hitler's faith in Fortitude held. On June 14th, a German intelligence memo reported confidently, Normandy remains a diversionary effort. The main enemy landing at Pas-de-Calais is expected within days. It never came. By the time German command finally realized the truth, that the phantom armies near Dover were nothing but rubber, plywood, and hot air, it was too late. The Allies had broken through at Normandy and were advancing deep into France. In a farmhouse near Dover, Jimmy Cole and Sergeant Blass received word of the breakthrough. They bought it. Cole whispered, barely believing it. All of it. Blass grinned, exhaustion lining his face. We fooled the best army in the world with a bunch of balloons. For the men of the Ghost Army, it wasn't glory or medals that mattered. It was knowing that their illusions, their art, their sound, their lies, had saved countless real lives on the beaches of Normandy. Across Europe, the tide of war had turned, and it had been helped not just by courage and firepower, but by creativity, by the audacious belief that deception could be deadlier than bullets. But Operation Fortitude wasn't over yet. Even as Allied forces surged through France, the phantom divisions of Patton's army continued to exist on paper, in radio chatter, and in the terrified imaginations of German generals. The ghosts had done their job. August 1944. France lay in ruins, and the German front was collapsing. The Allies had broken through at Saint-Lô, liberated Paris, and were advancing eastward toward the German border. Behind them, the beaches of Normandy, once red with blood, now teemed with supply lines and victory. But in Berlin, disbelief lingered like smoke in a ruined bunker. How could the Reich's intelligence apparatus, once feared as the sharpest in Europe, have missed it so completely? Captured German officers, interrogated by Allied intelligence, repeated the same refrain. We were sure the main attack was coming at Calais. General Siegfried Westphal, who had served under Rommel, later admitted in frustration, "We thought the Normandy landings were a diversion until July. We waited for Patton's army, but it never came." For months, even after Allied troops had seized Normandy, entire German divisions remained pinned at Calais, guarding against the ghost. Their tanks, artillery, and manpower sat idle while real battles were fought hundreds of miles away. The deception had worked so flawlessly that it delayed German reinforcements by nearly 7 critical weeks, time that allowed the Allies to secure their beachheads, build up their strength, and push inland. And for that, credit went not to a general with stars on his shoulders, but to artists, illusionists, sound engineers, and codebreakers. In a field outside Dover, the men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were finally ordered to dismantle their fake army. The air hissed out of rubber tanks. Wooden landing craft were burned or broken apart. The great illusion evaporated quietly into the summer air. Private Jimmy Cole stood watching one of the last inflatables collapse in on itself, folding like a defeated giant. "Hard to believe this thing helped win the war," he said softly. Sergeant Blass nodded. "That's the funny part about war," he replied. "Sometimes it's not about who shoots first. It's about who thinks better." When the Ghost Army's mission was declassified decades later, historians would marvel at its scale and sophistication. Over 300 artists, radio men, and engineers had orchestrated a deception so convincing it fooled not only the enemy, but even friendly reconnaissance crews. Their operation combined Fortitude South, the Dover-Calais deception, with Fortitude North, a parallel illusion suggesting a British invasion of Norway. Together, they stretched German defenses across thousands of miles, diluting their ability to respond to the real assault. The ingenuity behind it was staggering. Inflatable tanks that could be lifted by 4 men, but photographed as authentic. Recorded soundtracks of engines, trucks, and soldiers, played through massive speakers to simulate entire divisions. Fake roads and tracks carved into mud to fool aerial reconnaissance. Elaborate radio plays that ran for hours to mimic regimental command networks. And presiding over it all, the legend of General George S. Patton, the perfect decoy. The Germans never suspected that their most feared adversary was nothing more than a name and a shadow. As the war drew toward its brutal conclusion in 1945, the men of the Ghost Army quietly faded back into obscurity. Many returned to their former lives, painting, designing, composing, building. Their work had saved lives and shaped history, but few would ever know their names. Years later, when interviewed about the operation, one veteran of the unit summed it up perfectly. "We fought with paint, rubber, and sound, and somehow it worked. We didn't kill anyone. We just made the enemy believe." In the end, Operation Fortitude proved a truth as old as warfare itself. That victory doesn't always belong to the strongest army, but to the cleverest. As long as history remembers D-Day, it should also remember the invisible artists who made it possible. The ones who built armies out of air and turned imagination into one of the deadliest weapons of World War II.